Cassava takes about a year to mature, so many farmers turn to intercropping in order to use their land more efficiently and obtain income from their intercrop within 3 to 4 months. Cassava can be intercropped with many different crops, but some of the most common crops are grain legumes like common beans, soybeans, groundnuts, and cowpea, cereals, especially maize, other root and tuber crops like sweet potato. In this video, we will show you how to intercrop cassava with maize. Intercropping needs to be done in a smart way. Growing two crops together is not as easy as growing them as monocrops. Intercropping your cassava with maize will reduce your cassava yield because the maize will take away some of the water, nutrients, and light that would otherwise go to the cassava alone. A good intercropping system aims to minimize the cassava yield reduction and ensure that the value generated from the maize outweighs the loss in cassava yield. In a successful system, the combined revenue from the cassava and maize intercrop will be higher than that of a cassava monocrop. When intercropping cassava with maize, there are 3 things to consider. First, the cassava and maize varieties must be compatible. Second, soil fertility and the need for fertilizer must be addressed to ensure profitable crop yield. Lastly, cassava and maize must be planted in the right arrangement and crop densities. Let's look at these considerations one by one. The first step in creating a successful intercropping system is selecting the right varieties of both crops. When selecting compatible varieties, these can grow well together and give a good yield. If the varieties are not compatible, they will compete for light and yield will be low. The cassava variety should be erect or medium branching. One good variety is TME 419. It is erect and can withstand shading during the first 3 months of growth. In order to cut down on competition, the maize should be a short duration variety that matures in about 90 days. The longer the maize stays in the field after 3 months, the lower your cassava yield will be. A long duration maize variety may even smother the cassava to the point that the plants die off. Visit your agri-dealer to purchase quality maize seed. Your agri-dealer can help you choose a good variety that matures early. Some good maize varieties are the yellow variety, Samers 35, or the white variety, Samers 48. Now, you can begin thinking about soil fertility and the need for fertilizer application. Cassava and maize can both benefit from fertilizer application, but they have different nutritional requirements. Becoming familiar with your soil is the best way to make an informed decision on the need for fertilizer. In very poor soils, fertilizer alone will not increase crop yields. In very rich soils, by contrast, nutrient reserves are already high, and the addition of fertilizer may not increase crop yield further. Therefore, moderately fertile soils are the only good candidates for fertilizer use. To gauge your field's fertility, consider its history and past crop performance. If you have grown maize before, think of how it would perform if you did not apply any fertilizer. If your maize crop would be small and yellowish, only reaching knee height when tasseling, your soil is likely very poor. This means you need to invest in manure or compost before fertilizer can be a good option for your field. On the other hand, if your maize crop would be tall, deep green, and full of large cobs without fertilizer, your soil is very fertile. Fertilizer application may not increase yields further in this sort of field. If your maize would fall somewhere in the middle, reaching about shoulder height and looking yellowish or light green at the tasseling stage, you have a moderately fertile field that may benefit from fertilizer. In a cassava-maize intercropping system, we recommend applying 6 50 kg bags of NPK 15-15-15 per hectare at planting, and top dressing with 1 50 kg bag of urea at 3 weeks after planting, and a second 50 kg bag of urea at 5 weeks after planting. The decision on whether to apply fertilizer is not only determined by soil fertility, but also by the expected profit from fertilizer use. You should only invest in fertilizer if the extra revenue due to the yield increase is greater than the cost of the fertilizer. In order to make this decision, two things must be calculated: the cost of the fertilizer and the extra profit from the maize produce. We will start with the cost of fertilizer. Bearing in mind that the recommended rate of fertilizer is 6 bags of NPK 15-15-15 and 2 bags of urea per hectare, let's try an example. Your local agri-dealer can provide you with the cost of a bag of each type of fertilizer. But let's say that they sell NPK 15-15-15 at 10,000 naira per bag and urea at 8,000 naira per bag, which means that 6 bags of NPK 15-15-15 would cost 60,000 naira and 2 bags of urea would cost 16,000 naira. Adding those two numbers together, we reach a total fertilizer cost of 76,000 naira per 1 hectare. Next, we need to calculate the extra revenue from the increase in maize yield. Fertilizer will increase the yield by at least 4,000 cobs. If you sell maize by the cob, simply multiply the expected extra cobs with the price of 1 cob. For example, if the maize sells at 30 naira per cob, you can expect 120,000 naira extra revenue per hectare, because 30 times 4,000 is 120,000. Now that you have these numbers, you can compare the extra revenue with the cost of fertilizer. We determined that the cost of fertilizer at 76,000 naira per hectare. The extra revenue totaled 120,000 naira, which is larger than the investment in fertilizer. By subtracting the investment from the extra revenue, we can see that the net profit gained from fertilizer is 44,000 naira. With this in mind, you can judge whether or not this profit is enough to justify the investment in fertilizer. Remember that although you will make your decision based on the extra from the increase in maize yield, your cassava will also benefit from fertilizer. You can expect 1 to 2 tons of additional cassava yield from fertilizer application. If you determine that fertilizer is a smart investment for your cassava crop, you will now need to calculate the exact fertilizer requirement for your field. We had discussed the recommendation to apply 6 bags of NPK 15-15-15 at planting and top dress with 2 bags of urea per hectare. But how do you convert that recommendation on a hectare basis to the area of your field? We'll illustrate with an example. A hectare is an area of 100 by 100 meters. Let's say you have a field of 60 by 50 meters. We have to apply the rule of 3. First divide by 100 times 100, then multiply by 60 times 50. This means that the 6 bags of NPK 15-15-15 must translate to 6 divided by 100 times 100 times 60 times 50, which works out to 1.8 bags. So for this example, the recommendation becomes about 2 bags. Likewise, 2 bags of urea means 2 divided by 100 times 100 times 60 times 50, which works out to 0.6, or about half a bag for the area of a field of 60 by 50 meters. Using this method, you can calculate the fertilizer requirement for any field. Once you know how much fertilizer you need, you can move on to application. NPK 15-15-15 should be applied in a small hole next to the maize at planting. Dig a 5 cm deep hole, about 5 cm away from the maize plants, and place the NPK 15-15-15 in the hole and cover with soil. Soil must be moist when fertilizer is applied, and additional rainfall must be expected soon after to allow the fertilizer to dissolve and be taken up by the plant roots. At 3 weeks after planting, make shallow furrows about 20 centimeters away from the maize row. Apply the urea into the furrow and cover with soil. At 5 weeks after planting, do the same for the second dose of urea application. Now that we have provided advice on choosing varieties and determining fertilizer needs, we need to give recommendations on how to plant cassava and maize. If you ridge your field, we recommend creating ridges that are about 1 meter apart when intercropping cassava and maize. Plant cassava and maize at the same time during the long rainy season. Planting in September or October may lead to strong competition for water. Plant your cassava vertically or slanted at the tops of ridges, if your field is ridged, with the cuttings at an inter-row distance of 80 centimeters. Plant maize about 15 centimeters away from the cassava cuttings, halfway down the slope. If you do not ridge your field, plant the maize in the middle between two cassava rows. If your soil is very fertile, or if you decided to apply fertilizer, you can plant your maize crop at a high density of 25 centimeters between hills. However, if the soil is poor or fertilizer application would not be profitable, plant maize at a low density with inter-row distances of 50 centimeters between hills. That way, competition for nutrients and water is reduced. To ensure optimal crop density, plant 2 seeds per hill and thin to 1 plant per hill after about 2 weeks. Alternatively, you can plant 1 seed per hill and reseed any missing hills about 5 days later. Let's reflect on what we've learnt in this video. There are 3 important things to look at when intercropping cassava with maize. First, we must choose compatible varieties of each crop. The cassava should be erect or medium branching, and the maize should be early maturing. Second, we need to determine the soil fertility and whether the field could benefit from fertilizer application. Fertilizer is only a good investment for moderately fertile soils. Before deciding to apply fertilizer, compare the added revenue against the cost of fertilizer to ensure it is a shrewd investment. We recommend applying 6 bags of NPK 15-15-15 per hectare at planting, then top dressing with 1 bag of urea 3 weeks later and a second bag of urea at 5 weeks after planting. Lastly, the plants must be intercropped in the right arrangement at optimal density. In fertile fields or when fertilizer is applied, we recommend planting maize at 25 centimeters between hills. Otherwise, plant maize at a lower density with inter-row distances of 50 centimeters between hills. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you've enjoyed it. Here are some handy resources with additional information.